Hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Mick Audsley is most known as an English film and television editor with more than 30 film credits. He has worked often with directors Mike Newell and Stephen Frears. Mick got his formal training at Hornsey College of Art and the Royal College of Art, working as a sound and picture editor. Mr. Audsley won a BAFTA TV Award for 1993's Screen 2. What most people are probably not aware of is prior to his work editing film and TV, Mick had a go as a singer, songwriter, musician. He released a couple of solo albums during the early 70s and was also a part of a bluegrass band, the Echo Mountain Band, who released an album in 1975. Hopefully today we can shed some light on the musical side of Mr. Audsley, as well as highlighting some of his achievements in TV and film. Well, welcome, Mick.
Hi, Greg. Nice to be here.
Nice. Thank you for joining me. Let me get that. There we go. Talk about going back in the time machine. Where were you born?
I was born. I was born in Rochester, Kent. I don't know how well you know the southeast of England, but that's a town on the River Medway, which runs parallel with the Thames. So it's probably, in the region of 25, 30 miles outside of London. And yeah, I was born there, but was raised and brought up in a largely from the age of 4 in a place called Sevenoaks, which is kind of a commuter town outside of London, to the south, between sort of London and Canterbury.
Okay, I'm familiar with the band called the Buff Medways. I wonder if
Oh,
they
okay.
named it after the
Yeah,
river.
yeah.
Yeah.
And because it's in the county of Kent, and I don't know which way round it goes, but according to which side of the river you were born, I guess I was born in the hospital in Rochester, and I don't know what side of the river it's on, but you're either a man of Kent or a Kentish man, and it will define which side of the river you were born. Don't ask me which one is which. And why would anybody be interested?
Oh God, a man of Kent or a Kentish man?
I don't
Very
know.
good.
It's very strange. It's very strange.
Well, how about do you recall as a child hearing music in the household?
I do very much so because my father was a fine amateur flute player. Um, he was a furniture maker and designer of great skill, and but he loved classical music, and he played in a sort of he played flute ever since he was at school, I think, and he would play in a semi-professional amateur orchestra during the winter months, and perform in an orchestra, and so there was always music in the house. And in fact, he also played the piccolo as
Oh,
well
okay.
as flute. And they lived at the sort of top of this hill. And if he was rehearsing on the piccolo, I could hear that thing about half a mile away because it was very high pitched.
Uh, well, so you think you might gotten the musical gene from your dad?
Possibly, possibly. I certainly music was very much around in the house, and you know, I don't think he had a great deal of interest in pop music or certainly not bluegrass. When I came home from school, said I'd been asked to join a bluegrass band. I didn't even know what it was. Uh, and he certainly didn't. And so my interest in sort of folk music and jazz and so on, uh, sort of developed while I was at school. And they were very aware of it. They encouraged it, but I don't think if they were absolutely honest, it was quite their thing.
Right, right, exactly. They would have uh, liked for you to go in a little different direction career wise, probably.
I'm sure they came to concerts and stuff, and just as doting parents do, and sort of probably tolerated seeing their 13-year-old strumming a guitar.
Well,
Very
speaking
nice,
of
dear. Very nice.
right,
What would you like for
patroni
supper?
yeah, patronizing you, huh? Yeah, well,
No, but
that's right.
But it was very much an arts-based house.
Okay. Well,
My father being a designer, and my mum also did a lot of textile work and weaving. There was a loom in her bedroom, in the bedroom, so that you go in and you'd either hear the flute playing or the clack of the loom as she shoved the shuttle through, making some of them I have here actually. I think, oh yeah, this is one of hers, this sort of thing.
she
Yeah,
made it. Wow.
yeah. And so that there was very much a sense of encouraging the arts in the
Yes.
household, for which I'm eternally grateful.
Yeah, she was an artisan. Well, speaking, you mentioned the guitar. Was that the first instrument you learned to play?
Yeah, yeah. I did have piano lessons, classical piano lessons, and with a very nice elderly lady who was called Miss Breathing.
It's breathing.
And I must have been a terrible student because kind of the stuff that she was teaching me to play didn't sort of chime in my.
Yes.
I wanted to play boogie woogie, and the
Yes.
blues, and so Eric Satie and so on wasn't quite on my map or whatever it was. But I, to this day, regret my father's, uh, you know, influence to say, well, you should learn to read music, and I never did, fluently. I could do it slowly, but not fluently, and I always regretted it. I still do.
Yeah. Well, I've heard that story so many times with,
Yeah,
taking lessons, that you kind of outgrow those at some point and you want to do your own thing. Like you say,
yeah,
spread your wings. Yeah.
yeah.
And
But at the
it
same time, yeah, I think one tends to overlook the fact that, okay, maybe I didn't go that route, but it's certainly you're like a sponge and all this stuff goes in, and
right.
it certainly added to my sense of what was going on and interest in things ultimately.
Right. You do absorb all that. So,
Yes. Yeah,
yes.
and I'm very grateful for it, even though I didn't become a concert pianist under Miss Breathing.
Under his breathing.
I don't know
Well,
if how you spelt that, whether it was Breathing or I can't remember. I'm sure she's moved to a higher piano lesson in the sky now.
right. Well, can you recall one of the first singles or albums that you bought yourself?
Ah, gosh, that's a good one. I definitely remember being a Beatles nut. That
Mm,
buying Revolver was um, sort of a very big moment of hearing that and thinking, my goodness, the whole idea of layering sound suddenly was so exciting. And pre-Pepper, obviously. So yeah, I certainly bought that, and I remember buying a lot of, Taylor, uh, early Stills and Nash and Young and all those guys. Yeah, I remember buying, but I can't remember a specific record other than I remember looking at the cover of Revolver thinking, wow, this is cool.
yeah. Well, I think that's one of their finest albums. So, you know, it doesn't get talked about enough.
I think it's a mark, I really do. And it was slightly overshadowed in my, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although it's been, I know recently, and there's a moral issue here, which is quite interesting, which is Sean Martin, George Martin's son, has they've been able to sort of with, I think AI, strip the tapes back so that you can actually solo and the stems of the recordings, or in effect, which I think is quite difficult. Why would you want to do that? It was kind of it's something wonderful about the beginning of that whole technology and understanding that what they were all doing uh, without a great deal of technical tools.
Right.
So looking at it again, I don't know whether that's right. I like it as it is.
Yeah, I do too. I tend to like that too, even with all the warts and all,
Yeah,
because it is of that time.
absolutely. What year would that have been? Like 64, 5, something?
Yes, yes. Around mid 60s, yeah. I would think.
I definitely bought records before Revolver, but right now I can't think of a single one, but
Yeah.
I'm sure I must have done.
Well, what about some other bands, artists, musicians that you were into, let's say as a teenager?
Well, um, definitely Beach Boys. I had this passion also for country music and bluegrass, so I bought a lot of Bill Monroe and those guys. Wonderful band called the Country Gentlemen. Uh, so I had a whole sort of parallel. There were parallel tracks. One was the kind of folk things, and eventually, of course, the band. I was absolutely besotted with the band, and still am, because they kind of walked the time that sort of had a foot in both areas, as it were, the Americana and the history. So yeah, I absolutely went out the minute those albums came out and cherished them.
Yes, exactly. That's the thing about the band. I mean, you couldn't really stereotype them or put lump them in any one category. That's what I think
No, and I
appeals.
still treasure them and love them as much as I did back then as a teenager.
Yes. Well, what about the music scene around you? Uh, Say as a teen. Was it?
Well, yeah, there was, I guess, as a late teenager, or still being at school,
Yeah.
there was obviously this sort of enormous tsunami of interest in the singer-songwriters like Mitchell, Taylor, Carole King, um, all of those people are on the edge of kind of the folk to pop area. And I was besotted with that, the idea of the singer-songwriter. And it was through bluegrass that I met Dave Cousins of the Strawbs,
Oh, that's
because
true.
Dave, I don't know, we used to play in folk clubs as the schoolboy band that we were. And there was a strange coincidence that the two brothers who uh, became invited me into this band, and me not knowing what bluegrass was at school, were the two sons of our music teacher, who was
Ah.
named Fuzz, and because of his big beard. Brian Townend was a remarkable man who taught us music, but in very much in the way that everybody should participate. The first thing you learn is a 12-bar blues, whether you hit something or you strum it or whatever. It was very open because we're talking about the sort of tutors and teachers who were part of, if you like, the cool CND artsy revolution in the mid 60s.
Yeah.
And so it by coincidence, his two sons were at the school as well. And they invited me to join them because I played at a concert at the school on my own. And they said, "Oh, would you like to be in a bluegrass band?" I said, "Yeah." I didn't know what it was, but I thought I better say yeah. And so Rick Townend, the eldest of the two boys, invited me, and I remember sort of walking down towards the house, hearing this banjo.
Yeah, yeah.
Without turning around, but I didn't. And so yeah, we that's how we started with bluegrass, and through playing folk clubs in and around London
Yeah,
and the
you,
southeast, um, we met Dave Cousins, and that ultimately um, led me to saying, well, look, actually, I've got another strand here, which is that I've got all these songs that I've written. And he introduced me eventually to this Swedish company called Sonnet Records, which is where we made the two albums that I think you heard. Yeah, and that was through Dave. Yeah.
through Dave. Well, that's interesting because I've reached out to Dave. I guess his manager or website promo agent, and he forwarded the emails. That's a couple of weeks ago, I guess it is.
Ah,
So if you are you still in contact with him?
I haven't seen him. There's a strange coincidence, which is I'm just down at our little house by the sea, and I know he lives quite near here because other locals know him. He used to live in this same little town by near, not very far from Dover.
Yeah,
And but I haven't had contact in many, many years. I'd love to see him. So,
yeah,
and he was a very he kind of produced me to do demos at the beginning of all of this, and before I met Robert Kirby, which was sort of a game changer.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
More of
that's
that I'll
someone,
tell you.
someone I'd really love to talk to. And it's sad about John Hawken passing away. You know who John was, yeah.
Yeah,
Instrobes, he was Instrobes. They
yeah,
had,
and sadly Robert is died in 2010. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. You know how they say that comes in threes.
yeah,
Three keyboard players recently. Mike Pender, Moody Blues,
yes.
um, and then Richard Tandy from ELO. I don't know
Is
if
that right? Okay,
you've
yes,
heard that.
I know the names, but not terribly well.
And then John Hawken just
Yeah,
last week or so, or a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, back to the music here.
yeah,
Um, after now, when you attended art college,
yeah.
uh, was before your foray into music, right? Was that?
No, not really. The
No,
music was it was all going along in parallel, really.
okay, okay.
In fact, I was so after school I went to Hornsey College of Art, as you mentioned, which was like uh, a diploma course for 3 years to study graphic design, photography, and film. At that time, there weren't sort of film schools as such for graduate, only postgraduate. So I thought, well, I better I better get a job. So I better need a trade, as it were. And I was carrying on with, and that's probably when I saw most of Dave, I think. He said, well, there's this company, they will demo some of your songs, and they were willing to take me on for the songs, not as a performance as such. They were looking for material. And he said, well, let's demo these. And I did. And there was an occasion, and I can't quite remember the dates, but I think I was probably still at Hornsey, not in my postgraduate course at the Royal College of Art, which was 3 years later. Somewhere in there, I'm a little hazy on the time, it being centuries ago.
Yeah, that's all right.
But so Sonnet very kindly sort of started amassing the songs that I had written, and just had demos of, largely just me and a guitar. Then Dave came along. We did a few band things with maybe 3 or 4 people to do some more sophisticated demos. And then one day I got a phone call from Sonnet saying, we've been doing an album with, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Champion Jack Dupree, the
Okay.
keyboard player, I think. And said, well, we've got 4 musicians in Morgan Studios in London, booked for 3 days, but they finished a day early. So these guys are booked. If you go there tomorrow with your songs, that see what you can do. And so we recorded 3 basic tracks that day, and then I didn't hear anything for a long time. And then one day I got a call saying, well, we really like these. Would you like to finish them and maybe do some more? But you need a producer, because I'd basically just gone in on my own with these guys. And I mean, I can't tell you, Greg, how naive I was. I literally just rolled up with a guitar and a case and a load of paper and sat in the studio and said, it goes like this, it's in E, and they were such wonderful players. They just followed. And we eventually,
Yeah.
those tracks ended up on Dark and Devil Waters.
Well, so that's what I was going to ask you. Those demos, some of the songs showed up on 1973's Dark and Devil Waters.
Yeah.
Okay. And you covered a wide array, I think, rock, blues, folk influences. You can hear there on that
Yeah.
album.
Yeah. I plagiarized everything I could lay my hands on.
That's what I hear, and talking to different people. It's like it's not intentional. It's just those influences come out. And it's you like talking about the sponge before, the
Yeah.
analogy, it's in there. So they're going to come out in your music. Well, that album was the first time that you came up on my radar. And who were some of the musicians that played
Well,
on that?
yeah, after I just have to remember exactly on those very first session. Definitely Mike Hug, the keyboard player, was there. Um, but basically after those three tracks, uh, we had done rhythm tracks and maybe I did vocals, I can't remember, but we had those. And when a good deal of time went by before I had no intention of really, they were just demos of songs. I had no, I wasn't making an album, such I was just demonstrating these songs. And they said, well, we'd like you to continue, but we want to introduce you to Robert Kirby.
Okay.
And Robert knew Dave. I think maybe Dave was busy and maybe Dave recommended Robert. And I was introduced to Robert. And indeed, fairly shortly afterwards, Nick Drake, which is a whole nother side of the story, which I'll get into. But
Yes.
basically, I met Robert and he became producer arranger for the additional tracks. And he would also book, and we basically booked a rhythm section to continue, which was Hookfoot with Caleb Quay,
Yeah.
Roger
Yes.
Pope, Dave, yeah, and those guys.
Right.
And they were wonderful, and we had just a ball. They gave us a budget there by this time to say, okay, here's I can't remember what the fee was or how much they gave us, but here's a budget. Come back in 6 months' time with 12 tracks, having done 3 rhythm tracks. And then we did overdubs on those and carried on, and new tracks as well. And so there was Hookfoot, and we had featured artists like BJ Cole, the steel guitarist, who I
Oh,
still in touch with, Brian Cole,
yeah.
um, Johnny Van Derrick, fiddle player. Gosh, I mean, Robert introduced me to all these people because he was doing other sessions. And we used to sit in his workroom and say, "Wow, who would we like to hear next week?"
Right.
We'll have Lowell Coxhill, right? We'll have Lowell Coxhill. And so it was just like a treasure trove. I had the time of my life.
Yeah.
And I just loved every minute of it. By this time, I was also doing holiday jobs. I think by then I was at the Royal College of Art, and I was working as a sort of in the holidays as an assistant film editor. But I
Okay.
had a wonderful boss, and he would let me go off early. And I say, Jonathan, I've got a session at 2. Would you mind if I just disappear for 3 hours? He said, no, go, go. He loved it. So I was literally riding 2 horses with one ass, as they say. Forgive the vulgarity. So but it was encouraged by these wonderful people. And yeah, I look back and think, well, there was that time where the singer-songwriter thing was exploding.
Yeah.
It was London. It was the early 70s or late 60s, and that's kind of what we all did. People were enormously generous because certainly at that first session, I know the one where I was given the musicians for the day. Late in the evening, we're still there, and the guys who were on a session next door, I have no idea who they were, said, "Oh, we're just finishing. Can we come in and play? We've got some percussion." They said, "Oh, great, come and join us." So they'd join in, and we had nice congas and stuff. And they never asked for any money. It was just like that's how it was back then. That
Yeah.
was wonderful.
They just wanted to jam. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that was nice that you were able to go in there on somebody else's dime. That they had booked it in.
yeah. No, it was a complete. I would look back and think how naive I was, and I just, oh, great, and but how lucky I was to be given this train set to play with, which was making vinyl records.
Well, I liked your voice, and I know you've been told this. Speaking of Caleb Quay, there may be that connection there. Elton John,
Yep.
which is a good thing. Um, do you remember any of the songs off the album, off of Dark and Devil Waters? I just had a
Oh
few
yeah.
comments.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I particularly remember Caleb did this. wonderful solo to a song of mine, which was called Towers.
Yes,
Actually,
right.
he played keyboards as well. He's not
Yeah.
very, he wasn't known for, he was a wonderful keyboard, I mean, all-round musician, but Towers, he played keyboard as well as this. He dubbed. I remember just sitting there behind the glass as an overdub, watching Caleb do the solo that's on the end, and I was just like,
Yeah.
well, am I lucky?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember. I could remember most of the tracks. There
Yeah.
were some which were just sort of smaller.
Yeah.
Some we had strings on. Yeah, I can remember most of them with
Yeah.
with a little bit of help.
Okay. Well, I'll help prod you a little bit.
Yeah,
Well, Towers was a nice way to start off the album.
yeah.
And like
It
you
had a
said,
sort of riff ending. It had a riff, dun, dun, dun. Yeah,
yeah,
that's that. And Caleb really jumped on that, and yeah, it was fun.
yeah, like all the elements in that one and the backing singers too. Uh,
That's right. That's right.
uh,
I remember them. I was pretty impressed with them.
yeah. The Isle of Dogs is another one that I like. With your voice and the piano, again, that sounds very Elton Johnish.
I'm
Johnish.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. There were two that like that. There was one called The Dutchman as well. Maybe that was on the second album, but the Isle of Dogs was definitely.
Uh,
It's just a part of London. I don't know if you know where it is. The Isle of Dogs is
no,
is
no,
uh,
tell us.
the River Thames does a very extraordinary loop,
Okay.
and now the financial district is on the Isle of Dogs, I think. But it's a sort of loop. It's got a canal behind it or something, and I was all rather intrigued by this back then. So yeah, and I would write some of those songs on the piano in my cack-handed way. So some were guitar based and some were piano based as a starting point.
The next track reminds me of she. Well, I'll tell you, she, a railroader.
Yeah,
Sounds like an influence that you mentioned earlier. Sounds like a Carole King track.
that's actually the one. That was one of the very. I think that was the song which actually was in that very first set because Mike Hugg played that wonderful. I don't know if you have the credits in front of you. I would remember that. Was it Johnny Gustav? I can't remember exactly the band, but his keyboard playing that had this long, wonderful ending to it. And
Yes.
I just couldn't stop him. I just remember keep the tape going and keep it going. He's playing. Yeah, it's kind of a weird song. I couldn't tell you what it's about. It was the
It's not.
70s, Greg. It was the
Yes.
70s.
And, and if you remember it, you weren't really there, right? Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah,
Okay.
kind of.
Kind of, sort of. Well,
Yeah. I think I was quite
go
well
ahead.
behaved while we were working. I don't remember sort of being off my head or anything because I was sort of in awe of the whole process, and I loved the whole. People were very kind to me and very. I became friends with all these people, the engineers and the assistant engineers. I grew very, very fond of Robert, who, became a very, very close friend. And so I felt I just sort of landed in heaven, basically.
The timing and the luck has a lot to do with it. Yeah,
Exactly.
you're right. You're right. Well, and that reflects on your personality too, being able to get along with people like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, but I was always interested in music and sound and kind of the movie making, and they seemed to be one world to me because the movie making work when it finally got going was also involved, obviously, a lot of music and sessions and all that stuff. So I never saw them as being that separate. Although perhaps in view of how things panned out, I realized that I wasn't going to be able to make a living as a musician. I just knew, I just knew that that wasn't going to happen. And so that's why my film life started to take a lead out of necessity.
Yes, yes. Well, we'll get to that. I
Yeah.
wanted to mention a couple of more songs and then talk
Yeah.
about your storyboard album. Um, I like the country sound of Two Steps from Lucifer.
Okay.
Uh,
That was
that,
that
that
was
must
with Brian. Yeah.
that must be BJ.
Definitely
I,
BJ. I can't remember who else was on that. Yeah,
yeah,
maybe Johnny Van Derek, I think. The fiddle,
okay.
maybe. I don't. I should have. I don't have the credit list with me, but definitely Brian. Because also I got to know Brian pretty well, and he invited me onto an album he made, which was called under the name of the New Hovering Dogs. And so I got to sing on one of his tracks on an album for him. So that was fun. That was
That,
also fun.
that was fun doing. This Road I Know is a very nice track. You
Yeah,
remember? Yes,
I do
yes.
remember that. And to my utter surprise, Greg, the other day, quite by coincidence, I received, and I'll get into this, but I was corresponding with fans of the Nick Drake thing and how all that. And eventually somebody wrote to me through Facebook Messenger, perhaps a bit like yourself, and I didn't pick it up. And he said, are you Mick Audsley? And I wrote back, said, yes, I am. Oh, I love your albums. By the way, that song, This Road I Know, was played at my mother's funeral. And I said, you really? He said, she absolutely loved it. So we played it at her birth. Well, I felt very honored. I
Right,
could,
right.
I mean, it's a song from 50 years ago.
Right, right. It shows how the songs have traveled, and
Yeah.
they do. People pick
Well,
up on. Yeah,
yeah, but they didn't sell well, and I know I was sort of personally disappointed in that. I sort of understand it now, and I think in a way the vogue at that time was to dress songs up with quite heavy arrangements and so on.
yeah,
And I don't think I quite, and this is not nothing to criticize Robert's work because I adored Robert's work, but I didn't quite position that correctly, I don't think.
yeah, yeah. Right, right. Well, it all has to come together,
Yeah,
everything. Yeah.
yeah.
But you also were dealing with a lot of competition too at the
Oh,
time.
completely. Yeah, I knew when I was outclassed.
Well, the title track, Dark and Devil Waters, has a nice gospely type of sound to it. I think that's the best track on the album myself.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And it's my good old friend, the guitar, it features the guitar, my lovely D35 Martin, which I've had since I was 16. I've still got that guitar, and in fact, I have nightmares about it being stolen. My wife is bored with this, but I, there was an occasion years ago when the flat that I was living in London, and I kept it under my one-bedroom flat. I kept the Martin under my bed, and I came home one day and found that the rest of the house, which was owned by some very lovely people who rented the room to me, the house had been burgled. And I go, oh no. And I run into my little bedsit, reach under the bed, and oh, the guitar's still there. They'd taken the cameras, they'd taken the record player. I didn't care about that. The Martin was under the bed. Uh,
your baby was still there,
yeah,
so.
yeah, I can't explain it. It's a perhaps rather unhealthy relationship with something you've had that long, but um, yeah, that's the way it goes.
Well, glad that they didn't touch that.
No,
Well, moving forward to storyboard,
yeah.
the next year, 74, you mentioned this song earlier, The Dutchman. Really, really nice track. Really, I enjoyed that one.
It was odd because yeah, I don't know kind of what I wanted something that was rather like a hymn in
Yeah,
some way and very sort of lyrical. And again, that was came of tinkering around on a piano. And again, I can't remember who played the piano on that particular version of it, but I think maybe Anne Odell or somebody like that. I can't remember. Um, I've got it all written down, I'm afraid, on a piece of paper. I kept very careful notes of who played what, but I don't have it with me at the moment. But no, I was fond of that song, and uh, I've actually I also did another recording of it myself in a different way because I thought maybe it would survive a different, slightly different rendition.
rendition of it. Well,
Yeah.
nice Caribbean sound to Mr. Foghorn Likes Bananas.
Yes.
Uh, yes, yes. And it was released as a single. Did it get
The-
any radio play at all?
I think it did. I remember doing an interview about it. I had this thing where it was a slight overlap with the film thing that all of the songs were story based, that they had a narrative, and that was interested me. And I personally did all the artwork for each of these characters, of the 12 characters. In fact, I've got one on the wall here, over there somewhere.
Oh,
Uh,
sure.
can you see next to the fish as a clown? I
Yes,
don't,
I can see.
yeah,
I can make
but
that out.
that's the song um, called "The Circus" and Captain Cat. So each song had a sort of narrative spin, and I wanted the characters. It was just a way of writing little stories rather than angst-ridden songs. That each one had a sort of, it gave me a wider tapestry to work within.
Work with them. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I really like that track. Right from the very beginning, it kind of puts you, oh, I'm on vacation now.
That's right. That's
You
right.
know, uh,
I
so
was convinced that Mr. Foggart, I was convinced it was kind
yeah,
of a children's song as well. I sort of was convinced that that would be something you could sing easily.
yes, yeah, and it's the type that stays in your head for a while after you hear it too. It kind of bounces around up in there.
Just recently, I've been writing a song for my grandson, and
Uh,
how hard it is to write songs for children. It's
yeah,
impossible. I wish I'd never given myself that project, but anyway, it's very hard to write things that are simple and strong.
right. I could relate to that. I think I'm not a
Yeah.
songwriter, but I can hear what you're saying there.
Well, which
That,
makes you think, oh, the Yellow Submarine or something is a masterpiece because you feel like you've known it well, you have known it all your life in my case, but it's also the wonderful simplicity of it. Yeah, that's absolutely masterful.
yes, Kiss, keep it simple. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Well, another track on there, "She's a Real Lady," another radio friendly track.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like the keyboard on this one and the mandolin at the end of it. It really
That's
adds to
right. Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But
I think the mandolin was probably and again, sadly, he passed away. My friend, our music teacher, Andy Townend, I think it was Andy played mandolin on it. He was a very
okay,
fine musician and sadly passed away a good
yeah.
number of years ago now. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I was telling someone the other day, I said, I wish I had started doing these about 10, 20 years ago. Because there's so many that have passed on. I wished I could have talked to, but it
Well,
is what it is. And
it's wonderful that you do it, Greg. I
yeah,
feel honored to be a part of it.
I got to grab you guys while I can,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
As my dad used to say, you don't know how long the plank is.
Very, very good. I like that analogy. I like that. Yeah.
Well, it's quite ambiguous with him because he was a furniture maker, so I was never quite sure whether he was referring to furniture making and wood, or it was like, the pirate going out over
The
the end of the
pirate.
board with the crocodiles below and
I
somebody
have to
with a pistol behind.
right. I have to
It
tell you
works.
this. This
It
this
works.
one guy that I interviewed a year or so ago, he had knee surgery recently. So he posted on his Facebook. He said, "Yes, I'm walking in crutches." He said, but I don't have a parrot on my shoulder. And I laughed so hard. That's the most I've laughed in a long time. And he said,
Sus-
the first person who says pieces of eight is going to get a crutch in the crotch. Yeah.
yeah, crutch in the crutch. Very, very funny.
He has a
Very,
good sense
very
of
good.
humor about it, but I thought the parrot. I said that just made me laugh. That image. Uh, well, Blue Piece. That's one of my favorites from either album. It's because it's a mellower track. I tend to like the really sometimes the moody tracks. I wished it had been developed into a full song. It was too
Well,
short.
it's funny you should say that, Greg,
Mhm.
because and I promise you I didn't set this up, but um, the reason that was like that was one lunchtime. The sessions that we had for both of those albums were quite, you had 3 hours and you had to do 3 tracks. it was very disciplined, and Robert got these wonderful players. And there's no rehearsal. They would just read. He would either write chord charts, or it was all very, very disciplined and quick. And one lunchtime, everybody went off for lunch, and had by then got very friend with Jeff Calver, who engineered both of the albums, I think, Jeff. And I said to Jeff, I've got this half a song. Can I just put it down on tape while everybody's out to lunch? So I've got a record of it, and I'll think about developing it. And he said, of course. And I just literally sat down and played it with the live mic and the piano. That was it. And it was very short. And everybody liked it and put it on and it went on the album. Cut to literally 5 years ago, working on a film, one of my film assistants said, Mick, did you used to make music? I said, yeah, I did. She said, I've heard your albums. Oh, I said, great, that's lovely. She said, there's one song I really like. I said, it's very short. I said, oh, it's Blue Peas. So I was stunned by this, that this is somebody who's now only 23 years old, should pick up on this, here am I getting on 75. So recently, within a year, this last year, I decided to complete the song, which is very hard to go back. And I did.
Yeah.
And I can send it to you if you'd like.
Yes, I would very much so. Yes.
I fleshed it out, and I decided not to go back to the piano. I did it on the guitar. And if you're interested, I can send it to you. But I cannot tell you, Greg, what a stupid thing to do, to go back and try and live in the shoes of your 23-year-old self when you're getting approaching 75. But I thought, well, why did Anna like that song so much? Anyway, I sent it to her, and she said, oh, I was shocked because it was on the guitar, but yes, that's fulfilled. That's lovely. So if you're interested, I'll play you the complete song, but it's taken 50 years to come up with the other bit.
Well, better
the middle eight.
Yeah, better late than never. Yes, I would enjoy that very much. Yes, I'd love to hear the full stuff.
I will only send it to you, Greg, if you give me an honest response. If it doesn't work, I'm too old to worry about that.
Okay, I will. I'll give you an honest critique.
Please. Yes. I can take the crit. I can take it.
Well, you mentioned briefly earlier talking about the Echo Mountain Band.
Yeah.
How did you enjoy your foray into bluegrass?
Oh, it was wonderful. I mean, that's kind of what got it all started. And I still love acoustic music, all acoustic music in all forms. One of the extraordinary coincidences, again, through the school and Brian Townend, our music teacher, was that the bluegrass artist Bill Clifton came to England when we were teenagers, 15, 16 years old. And he happened to live, or had chosen to live, in the southeast, very near where we were at school in Sevenoaks. And Fuzz, our music teacher, phoned him up and said, would you like to meet the schoolboy bluegrass band? And he goes, what? And now bluegrass was not cool at that time. It wasn't cool. No. And I always struggled with the idea there was this sound, this music, which I loved, and the politics and the redneck politics, which I loathed. So there was always a bit of a road crash there. But Bill, God bless him, took us under his wing, and we played as his sort of support band while he was in Britain and in Holland, and we went all over the place, Belgium, as his backing band, as teenagers, and on through and in fact it was he that bought me that Martin D35 and bought it back from the States for me. I bought it from him. He bought it for me to have, and that was great. So I had this love affair with bluegrass music, and because he was the sort of ambassador of bluegrass music in the 60s in Britain, he was bringing all over these incredible musicians who we get to meet and hang out and play with, like Bill Monroe, like Richard Green, like Peter Rowan, Doc Watson. We met and hung out with all these people, and it was just fantastic. And we would play folk clubs and pubs and concerts and all that stuff. We hop in a van and go to Belgium and play in Antwerp and Holland. We did Holland. And so I'm forever grateful to Dear Bill for platforming us as teenagers and firing up this interest in that music. And
Right.
I ran the bluegrass band all ran in parallel with the kind of making the albums. We kept it all going for many years.
Right. Well, it's very interesting, and the commonality, what you shared with bluegrass, American bluegrass,
Yeah,
the roots kind of music.
yeah,
The blues music also, well, bluegrass blues.
yeah.
Uh, how you'd grow up in different countries, but the relationship to the music and where it came from, it's instilled in people on both sides of the pond, and all over as well. You can relate to
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
In fact, that's reminded me, Greg, of the question was unable to answer earlier because of my memory. Dipping in and out was I absolutely jumped on all the Ry Cooder albums
Right.
into the Purple Valley and all the early, so those were very big along with the band, and you can see so this kind of crossover between electric, Americana, bluegrass, all these things, and jazz,
Yeah. Well,
all were swimming around together.
right. Well, I listened to some of the tracks off of YouTube, off of the Echo Mountain the band, the album
Oh
75.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I tell you what, Rick could really play that banjo. Man, he's up there in the same class as Earl Scruggs for me.
Oh, absolutely. Well,
I'm back.
they were two they were two Rick is still I'm very much in touch with Rick. We went on playing for many years. Andy, who played the mandolin, his younger brother, who kind of had this extraordinary talent emerge as a 9-year-old.
Yes. Wow.
One day he couldn't play, and then I remember being at their house, and Andy was 9 or 10, and he suddenly picked up this mandolin and played like a demon. And there was a wonderful sort of brotherly tension between those two, where I was the guy in the middle separating them
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
when instruments were flying across the room. But we had a great time with the band, and I still to this day miss that fun that we had, and the excitement of doing that. But as I say, it wasn't considered a very cool thing to do
Yeah. Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
time, but then it became cool.
Yeah. Or you were at the forefront of that.
Yeah.
Now you wrote "Fall by Your Side," right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a nice one. Nice one.
Funnily enough, that song I would write specifically for the band as well. This is aside from the album. So um, this is the motive behind this was that Andy and Rick, as you put were such wonderful virtuoso instrumentalists on the banjo and the mandolin or anything they picked up. They could just play it. So I thought, what's my role in this? I'm the rhythm guitarist and the singer. Okay, I better come up with some stuff here to try and keep my chops up. So I would write stuff and bring it in, and that again was the wonderful sort of tension of bringing in something that was maybe at the wrong speed, and then say, oh, come on, we'll do this, and then slowly these things would emerge. But I'm glad you like them. That was such a comfortable song to play. We played it live hundreds and hundreds of times, and it just felt like it was. And again, I always was rather conflicted about this idea. What are these kind of middle class boys from the southeast of England doing, picking up Americana music in this way? Do they have ownership of it? And so I thought again that perhaps the thing to do would be to start to write about things in a more expansive, the world that we knew, not the little cabin on the hill.
Right.
Although I loved all that, I felt that wasn't right. We could imitate to learn to play it, but I was interested in us developing stuff that we were writing and singing about ours within, like the blues, within the format of that bluegrass music is. And so I
Right.
was very keen to push a contemporary tang to it, as was Andy, to feed in jazz riffs and anything he could find. He would very wittily would throw in, theme tunes from BBC radio broadcasts. So the Archers, I know you wouldn't know that, but it's kind of a one of those soap operas on the radio. It's been going for centuries, but it has a very distinctive theme tune. And Andy would just throw this into the middle of a solo, and you go, "What's that?" Okay, and then it would go away again. And I loved all that, the sort of wit of it. So yeah, that's how I became the sort of more the one pushing forth. And I used to like to make an irony of some of those things, like Country Shoes was meant to be a dig at all of that, of how you take something and twist it around. So that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm curious why there are no really references to your musical history, on the internet. I mean, there's a couple of sites that you can find, your albums and and ratings and that kind of thing. But as far as like in your bio, there's no mention.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't account for that. I mean, I did suppose I kept a kind of a lower profile on that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't planned. It's just it just happened, and my film life sort of more dominated.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know. I wasn't conscious or anything.
Go ahead.
Would just to wind back, but the wonderful thing now, rather than going to a very expensive multi-track studio, you can do all this at home or in my case, in my music shed.
Yes, yes.
And so I never stopped producing stuff, and yeah, that's been a lot of fun. But I very much miss playing live with other people.
Right, right. I can imagine you would. Yes. Well, segging into the editing and the TV and the film, uh, what were some invaluable lessons that you learned in art school?
Well, just to have faith in and follow your instincts. I had three remarkable people at school, Fuzz being one of them, an English teacher, and my art teacher, Bob White. There were three very, very strong influences there. And similarly at art school, a wonderful photographer, but Italian photographer by the name of Enzo Ragazzini. And these people just encouraged you to believe in yourself. And I guess it was no holds barred. Everything was alive at that time. And so I guess I felt a sense of support for the interest in music and in all movie making, animation, all those arts. And so it was really everything is possible. I think maybe that the spawning ground of the 70s gave us that optimism.
Right,
We can
right.
change the world,
And in ways you did, and have.
Well, and I was very lucky to come into contact with people in my uh, editorial life. By the way, I'm horrified to say I think it's 50 films now. That was
Oh, wow. Okay.
which makes me tired thinking about it, but I feel slightly exhausted just thinking of that number. But I was very lucky that these things led me to close relationships with people like Terry Gilliam, who I adore,
Yes.
and people who, again, are full of vitality and creative energy. And so I always felt very at home hanging out in the shadow of these giants who were kind enough to employ me.
Well, can you remember what was the first movie project that you worked on?
The very first, yeah, I had a funny career in that way, is that I went to film school, but mainly at that time because I was doing the music, I started off in sound, doing sound design and musical contributions to student films and small films. And then by coincidence, I ended up at the British Film Institute production board, and by a series of mishaps and a need for a job, I was offered a little test piece of a version of King Lear, which was going to be a film. They gave the grant if on the basis of this little test. And my film school friend Peter and I went and shot this test with a theatre company in Wales, and there was nobody to edit the picture. And Peter came back to me and said, "Why don't you cut it?" And I said, "I've never done that. I did go to film school, but I never cut picture." And he said, "You'll be all right." And I thought, well, I really need the 25 quid I'll get to do it.
Yeah.
So I started, and the minute I started putting pictures and sounds together, both,
Yeah.
it was a light bulb moment. And I thought, this is what I think I want to do this. And I know absolutely nothing, so I have to be very good at bullshitting my way through.
Yeah.
And we got the whole film. We made a version of King Lear on the strength of that little test piece. They said, "We love it. We'll give the money, but we want Mick and Peter to shoot and record this, and Mick can edit it." And then I sort of, one film led to another.
Okay. Well, when you started working, I know technology has changed a whole lot. Take us through a typical editing job back in the
Well,
back in the day.
with filming literally strips with holes inside, which
Uh-huh.
from an editorial point of view came in reels, and you had to log and make a library of all the material very, very carefully, because you had to go and fish all these pieces out of a box and literally join them with sellotape. So this required an awful lot of planning and thought and management of a physical asset. It's hard to believe now, but when I look back, and in fact with my students, I realized that the discipline of having to plan things in your head rather than press buttons as we do on laptops, like I'm talking to you on and all that, meant that you had to look at it in the case of a film or sounds, listen and look at everything, make copious notes, arrange it in your head roughly, and then manufacture it and then change it and develop it. Whereas now you can sit down with a laptop and editing or musical technology, and you can just start. You could just, which is great. But back then it wasn't. It was very cumbersome, but I think also quite wonderful in a way.
Right, right. Maybe you appreciated more the process, or having to go through that. Now we're kind of spoiled, in a way.
I think that's true, Greg. I do, and um, I just had this at that time. Not only did I just need a job because I'd just come out of college, and I thought I better get a living at this. I better make a living at. Um, it was a light bulb moment of thinking, this is what I want to do. I can do this. And I also realized it was sort of could run in parallel with all my musical life, because they are sort of blood brothers, as it were. And so that was how it all started.
Yeah. Well, how did you meet Stephen Frears, and first start working with him?
I met Stephen in 1981. Again, an extraordinary coincidence, which was because of the British Film Institute films. I had edited a film, and my sound editor, designer, as they were called sound editors then, was a very wonderful man who was more experienced than me. And we were just finishing a job for the British Film Institute, a smaller feature film, and he said, "I went to this Christmas party, and I was with Stephen Frears, and he's looking for somebody to edit a film, and I gave him your name." I go, "Oh wow, that's pretty cool." And I thought, well, that's not going to happen, because I looked up to Stephen as a, and sure enough, on the 7th of January, the phone rang. It was Stephen, and he said, "All right, come and meet." I said, "Okay." And then, as fate would have it, I had the most terrible cold, and I actually had to postpone my meeting for about 3 days because I was screaming. I thought, I can't go and infect him. It's just somebody I look up to. Anyway, very gracefully, we met in 1981 for a project for what is now Channel 4 here, but it was one of the first Film 4s in Britain. And all we did was talk about movies we liked and so on. And he said, okay, great. Um, I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. And I st- started on that film, and we worked together for on and off for 30 years or something
Wow.
more. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you couldn't have imagined that at the time that you
No,
were
no,
working with him. Well, yeah.
not at
Yeah.
all, not at all. And we grew very close. And I literally saw him on Friday. I think we're so close that it would be hard for us to make films together now because we know too much about each other. But we're very close and we keep in touch. And he taught me an enormous amount and over the years. But yeah, we've I wouldn't have missed a moment of any of those films.
Yes. Well, the same question for Mike Newell. Uh,
Yes, well, I really, again, that was because of Stephen. I think Stephen introduced me to Mike to make a film called Dance with a Stranger in 1984. Yes, that was the first film. And I'm sure that was because, he was a colleague of Stephen's. And yeah, so that slowly the films spread out and I started to work with different directors and I was very, very lucky.
yeah. Well, you have a long list. You just got in your list of work. So I just wanted to highlight a few that I'm familiar with and maybe get your recollections. You were up for an award for best editing on Dangerous Liaisons. That movie.
I think that's right. Yeah, yeah. I can't remember which it was. I mean, it's certainly a film which I'm very proud of and uh, uh, very happy film to make along with everybody involved. Um, and one of my favorite experiences on that film was we had a Baroque orchestra doing the Bach harpsichords and for the score, and they didn't have somebody. We were at Abbey Road, and they didn't have somebody to turn the pages for one of the four harpsichords. And I'm a complete Bach nut.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they said, "Oh, would Mick come down and page turn, for the one of the harpsichordists?" And I go, "Yeah, but I can't read at that speed." He said, "Don't worry, I'll kick your leg. Come and sit on the stool with me." So I sat on the stool next to one of the four harpsichords that were all splayed out in the middle of Abbey Road too. And I was just in heaven, I just thought I'm just going to pass out. This sound around me was so wonderful, it was so exciting. And yeah, so every time I see the film, I'm reminded of sitting there wondering, when am I going to pay? Oh, now! Turn the page because it da 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 da. But the
Well,
sound, oh, it was just heaven. It was just wonderful, wonderful.
well, that must be really fascinating work too, to be there from the genesis, and then see the whole process as it comes together, and to see the music. You hear it beforehand, and then to actually
Yeah,
see it on screen.
on the move. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
it's a wonderful job film editing because people don't. Common knowledge is that we start when it's all done. No, we're there from a week before, and I was in Paris, and we're there with the shooting and the editing is all going on together. They feed each other, and
Right.
so you are on almost as long as a director or producer. Um, Certainly, I did one of the Potter films, and that was my longest job. It was 73 weeks from beginning to
70,
end. Yeah,
73 weeks.
73 weeks. Yeah. By the
Wow.
time we got to the mix and audio side, yeah. So it's a big commitment.
You
It's a
you thought that was going to be a never-ending movie, huh? At
well,
73.
it well, no, that was for Mike Newell. Was it the shooting was a year? I mean, we were shooting film every 5 days a week for 53 weeks, 52 weeks. Yeah.
Wow.
Um, and that's because there are so many layers. And in this case, they were young, the kids could only do certain hours because of quite right, the restrictions to do with filming young people. So, it was quite complex because you'd cut to a shot of back of Dan's head, but it wasn't Dan because he was off at school. It would be a stand-in and all that stuff. So we had to weave together all these things. Um, but it was also it was a big film, and there are many layers that go into one shot. Lots of pieces that all have to be fused together. So it's
Yeah.
fascinating. That was 20 years ago now. So that
Right.
technology has moved on too. Yeah.
Wow. Was that pretty typical, what you heard from the Harry Potter series taking that long, a year to make
Yeah.
those? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Those big budget films take a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, going back
Mm.
time to 1993 Scream 2, directed by Steven. That's the one that you won the BAFTA award.
Yes, for The Snapper.
Yes.
It's a,
Yeah.
a film I'm very fond of because it was so beautifully written. And I have to say, um, any praise I got for editing it was undeserved because it was just so beautifully written by Roddy Doyle as a screenplay and so beautifully directed and made by the cast and with Steve and everything that it was it's sort of a film that was kind of born seemingly from my point of view effortlessly.
Oh,
And I remember very distinctly I was in Ireland with my assistant cutting it as they were shooting, and on literally on the Sunday, the last day, I received the last shot that would fit main draft of the film. And my dear assistant Mary Finney, I said, go out and get a bottle of wine. We're going to sit here and we're going to watch this film. I'd literally just put together over these 5, 6 weeks, and we'll see what we think of it. And we
uh,
put our feet up on the machine, and we both laughed so much at the film because it's very funny. And I thought, wow, this is great. But a lot of that was credit I got, which was undeserved because it's so beautifully written. And Roddy and Stephen had devised editorial juxtapositions, which were just written on the page,
yeah.
um, and I followed them. So I always felt slightly guilty. I got a pat on the back, but it was really Roddy's and Stephen's work.
So it was easy working on that one.
Oh,
Okay.
I loved it. It's very funny. It's got one of the great openings as well. It's got a very, very good opening.
Well, how was it working on Interview with the Vampire?
Oh, very good. Uh, Actually, it was with Neil Jordan that I was speaking earlier today. We're telling you about my Zoom difficulties. Um, yeah, another big film. Early days of visual effects, big cast, big stars and all that stuff. And a great pleasure to do because my connection to Neil was through my wife, who at that time was working as an editor. And she had made a film with Neil before we did one other one called We're No Angels, before Vampire.
Right.
And at a certain point, Vampire came along. I was asked to edit it. And one day while we're shooting at Pinewood Studios in London, Stephen Woolley, the producer, came to me and said, by the way, this is set for release in November, Thanksgiving that year, whichever year it was. How would you feel if we brought it to Independence Day, July the 4th? I.e., knock off August, September, and October. So, and I go, well, Steve, actually, you see that potted plant over there? I think I'm just going to go and throw up in that. And he said, no, 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 don't panic. He said, don't panic. We've got a plan. He said, would Yoka, my missus, would Yoka come and edit with you like you did on these other films? I said, well, I'm sure she'd love to. So she agreed, and we started at that point. We were sort of in the middle of shooting to work again as a two of us editing, and it worked very, very well, and it went very quickly. And in fact, at a certain point in the production, they said, look, actually, we're going to keep this release date for that November, not July that year, but we'd like Yoka and you to keep going as you are because it's working so well. And we zoomed through the film, and it was great. My memory is that we moved it along pretty quickly.
Well, I enjoy the movie itself, but you know, going back, what I want to do now is watch some of these that you worked on and go back
Oh
and
God,
say,
come on,
okay.
Greg. Look, it's bad enough having to listen to a song that's now taken me 50 years to write the middle eight.
And I'm going to critique, and I'm going to write you and say, Nick,
Yeah,
had you
would
thought
you do
about
it
maybe,
again? Yeah,
yeah, right. Had you thought about maybe doing this instead of, yeah,
yeah,
right. No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that to you. Well, I enjoy mentioning earlier Terry Gilliam. I
yeah.
enjoy his films, but of course his animation, going back to Monty Python, where he started. Uh, and 12 Monkeys, I think, is one of his better movies too.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, yeah. So
Um, I,
talk about some memories
oh
from that.
well, yeah. I knew Terry, but I can't quite remember why, but or how that came about. But shortly after Vampire, I know we did 12 Monkeys, and he asked me to cut it, and I just thought, well, I've landed in heaven because I knew David Peoples, who wrote it, and his wife Jan, who wrote that screenplay, because I had got to know David on a film called Hero for Stephen with Dustin Hoffman called. And so David was very kind, and he, in the interim years between those two films, would send me things. And he sent me this thing based on La Jetée, but it was very much their take. And, the apocalyptic story that it is. And I absolutely loved it. I thought I'd give my right arm to make this film.
Uh,
And as fate would have it, usually life isn't that kind, but it came around that Terry was cast to direct it, and he came to me, and I thought, wow, this is just fantastic. We're going to make this thing, and
yeah,
I absolutely adored it. Every minute of it, this crazy film, and I'm very proud of it. And we had a ball. It was hard work, but it was an amazing experience, and we got it done. And I got to know Terry very well in the process, and I've worked with him 3 or 4 times since.
yeah. He seems like a really nice guy too, from what
Oh,
I've
wonderful.
seen, interviews with him and things like that. Yeah, he,
He's one of the most creative people I can ever imagine being with. He's sort of exploding like a volcano at any given moment, and that sort of excitement and energy is just a joy, uh, a joy to be a part of. Um,
yeah,
yeah, so yeah, it was great.
yeah. Well, is your latest? We'll see how current the listing was of your work. Is your latest work Robert Zemeckis's Pinocchio? Is that your
Yeah,
last? Yeah. Okay.
yeah, yeah. That was, I think it was just at the back end of the pandemic, and I found that the restrictions that the pandemic put on us, and having to do many of our communications with Bob, between London and LA, or Santa Barbara is where he lives. I found that quite difficult, not from a personal point of view, but just not as much fun as being in a room,
Yeah.
as we had done before in other films. So yeah, it was just the pandemic had quite a big effect on that, and having to show work in the way, down the room rather than sitting together. A
Right.
very different thing. So yeah, but Bob is a wonderful filmmaker, a wonderful man. I admire him enormously. And so from that point of view, what a privilege.
Yeah. Well, any thing in the works? Anything on the horizon?
Yeah, there's a few things. I have been doing work as a consultant editor, which is where I come and help younger filmmakers finish with editorial advice and so on, which I enjoy a great deal. But mainly after after the pandemic, I've been mainly doing teaching at the National Film School in here in Great Britain, and
Okay.
hanging out with younger filmmakers like that gives me a little bit more time to do music. In the
Yeah.
shed, in the shed.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, what have you you got some new songs in the works and some
Yeah,
new
yeah. I have a lot actually, and it's I wonder what I will do with them all, but maybe you can tell me what to do with them after. I have about 50 tracks lurking around, about something like that. And we'll see. I don't think all of them are any good, or good enough, but um I've been using friends to do online overdubs, including Brian Cole, who very kindly gave me overdubs, and some other a wonderful bluegrass track that I wrote, and a wonderful singer called Matt Dame of the band called Steel Drivers sang for me, and he did an absolutely stonking good job on that. And so a lot of the sort of featured instrumentalists are people doing overdubs, and I'm exploiting friendships to achieve this. But through the whole Nick Drake thing, which has sort of
Yeah,
come up.
you were going to talk about that. Yeah.
Well, quite a story about probably a good few years ago. I was contacted by a writer, Richard Morton Jack, has just published this extraordinarily in-depth book called about Nick Drake. It's available now, and there was an occasion where Robert Kirby was writing a musical, and there was a lot of how shall I put this? There was some sort of zeitgeist, which was that Nick played on one of those two albums.
Okay.
He didn't. I would have remembered that he did, but we did hang out because he used to come to Robert's house. And I wanted to put the record straight because what we did record together, something for Robert's musical, and tapes which we've been unable to find since. So there was a whole lot of mythology which was slightly skewed. So I was very happy to have a chance to say, well, look, I did know Nick. We used to play in Robert's living room and stuff, but he didn't play on my albums, but we did record something for Robert, 2 tracks, actually, those Raikuda tracks.
Ah, okay.
How can you keep on moving, and Money Honey, which
Yes.
was, in fact, they weren't Raikuda tracks. They're traditional American songs from the 50s and 40s, I think.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Here it is. If I can get that up there.
oh, you've got it. That's it. The Life. That's it. Richard's book. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
You got it. I haven't actually read it from cover to cover yet because I actually find it quite emotionally upsetting because it's got a lot of friends and things in it. My friend Robert, who's no longer with us. It's quite powerful stuff. But Richard's done an amazing job. It's terrific, and it's a very, very wonderful document. But out of that came this interest in whether were there other recordings of Nick, and there were, but I cannot track down those tapes, or indeed the person who was Robert's manager. I can't find him, who probably owns those tapes still, but it was in, short, probably a year or 2 years before Nick's death. So finding tapes like that for a production which never actually went much further, pretty difficult. But out
Yes.
of that, people started to contact me, and like Richard, and I was speaking about having met Nick and known Nick and a little bit because very shy. I can't say I knew him, but he would come to the house and we'd all hang out, and then you'd look around, you think, where's he gone? And he'd just disappeared.
Gone.
And so I've had quite a lot of interest recently because of Richard's book about those stories of my limited contact, which was all through Robert. And so then people saying, oh, well, you still writing songs and all that. And I say, yeah, I've got about 50 in my back pocket. Don't go away. And I think I'm probably facing the time where I'm going to actually have to let some of them out of the bag.
Yeah, I think you do. I think you will.
Well, Greg, we'll talk about this in due course.
Yeah. All right, at a later date. Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, there was another where the two worlds, and this is a sad story, but where the two worlds collided for me was when I was working with Terry Gilliam. We made a film called The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus.
Yes, right.
And which starred Heath Ledger and Christopher Plummer. And we were shooting in London on a Sunday. We were due to go to Canada because part of the money was from a Canadian source, and the shoot was split between London streets and then a studio in Vancouver. And I usually have some contact with the cast, but in this case, at that point, after 4 years, I didn't. But I got a message from Heath Ledger saying, Mick, I hear that you met and knew Nick Drake. When we get to Canada, can we hook up? I'd love to hear you talk about that. And I said, of course, I said, I didn't really know him, but I met him a few times and we played a bit together, but I can't say I knew him. But my dear friend did very, very well. Robert Kirby, he's a ranger. So, and this is the sad part of the story. That was on a Saturday, Friday. And we were wrapping up London cutting room, due to fly to Canada to be there for the Friday to start shooting again on the following Monday. And I had just this tentative arrangement to meet up with Heath and talk about Nick one evening when we would finish work. And of course, suddenly on the Sunday night, I think it was, or the Tuesday, maybe, I can't remember, my daughter came in with a laptop and said, Heath has died under these circumstances, which had this ambiguous quality of how I remember being told about Nick's death.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some sort of mirror imaging of these things, of how these two wonderful artists had died. And it was absolutely shocking. And I thought how strange, what an extraordinary crossover of worlds that was. How sad. He was a much loved actor, much loved human being. I sadly never got to meet him. I knew he was crazy about Nick and his music, and had made a little film. I think that's what he wanted to talk about. So the dimension of Nick's influence has been going on and out, because at the time that he was coming to the house where I used to work with Robert, and I shared a flat or the house for a while, and he would show up. Nobody knew him, the musicians knew him, but
Yeah.
we said, look, this is this incredible poet, masterful musician. And then one day, suddenly, I heard this Volkswagen advert, with Nick's pink moon on it or something, and I go, wow, what's that? And then suddenly the whole thing exploded. So It was a funny crossover. I'm sorry to give you a sad story, but there was a great parallel in it, and resonated, because it was like a mirror image and then Robert telling me about Nick's death, and because we just received demos from Nick, which I heard, and Robert said no, he would never consider taking his own life if it was writing, if he was writing songs. And I hope that comes across, that I'm sure there's just a bit like Heath, these accidents that who knows exactly what the truth of it all is, but it was tragic and ambiguous in that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very, eerie. Yeah, similarity.
Forgive me clouding, but it's an odd crossover between the two worlds.
No. That's quite all right. That's fascinating too to hear that. I know there's a lot of Nick fans out there that will appreciate hearing that as well.
Yeah.
Well, Mick, anything else that you'd like to add or plug or mention?
Well, about the 50 songs,
Yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering how to whether I've got the courage to put them out somehow and so on. But one's also aware that perhaps the way in which I think of music now and so on, is that relevant to people now? When I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. And I think that you'll find out you had a lot more fans than you realized. I think
Well,
it's
I find
always
it's
good.
very cathartic, and I've never
Yes.
would never stop. I would never stop writing songs.
Right. Right.
If I've got something to say or I feel is has got something, um, I'm always excited about the one I've just written.
Yeah. Right.
I'm
Yeah.
very excited about conning all my musician friends to help me realize it. And I still just get so much fun from it. It's the pleasure of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, see about that, putting them together. And I mean, anything that's completed, or even if it's in demo form, you can send it to me, and I'll have a listen. People today, of course, with the streaming, you don't do it for financial gain.
No,
It's
no.
no, but it's because you love it. It's what you enjoy.
Yeah.
But I think you'd find, a lot of interest, and I think especially maybe some younger people too.
Well, that's why I was shocked by this friend Anna who was working with me, and I thought, oh, she didn't see the sell by best before tag on my. She obviously she didn't see that, and she picked this fragment of a song, and I was completely startled. So, well, with if you're really up for it, I'll send you a couple of tracks, Greg,
Yes, yes,
including that one.
yes, please do, please do.
All
As
right,
many
and
as
we'll
you,
find
as
out if
many.
anybody wants of the other 50.
Yeah, and some of the musicians that you're
Yeah.
utilizing here, might throw out some. They might give you some advice as well,
Yes.
and
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
So I think it's worthwhile. I think it's worthwhile.
Bless you.
Uh, yes, yes, I do. Well, thank you,
My
Mick,
greatest pleasure.
especially for sharing some, light on your musical adventures. Thanks for doing that, and it's been enjoyable. Yeah. Um,
It's been a
and I
great pleasure. Thank you for having me, Greg. And I do hope we can keep in touch. And
yes, let's do
uh,
it.
I will hurl a few things across the ocean.
Yes, please do. And I'll watch out, and then so they don't just don't throw them at the windows, okay? Okay.
It's lovely to talk to you. And my best to all the people that watch. Wishing you all well out there in this community of music makers and cinema lovers. And we should all stick together in these difficult times. So it's very heartwarming to know that we are sort of a unit with
Yes.
common loves of the
Yeah,
joys of life rather than the woes.
there you go. It's nice that we share those interests. Yes, exactly. Yes. Thank you, Mick, so much. And we
Keep in
will
touch.
stay in
Write me.
touch. Yes, I will.
I'll
And
say
I will,
goodbye.